So we've got a packed agenda, so we better jump straight in. I'm going to introduce our first presentation, and it will be another two-speaker affair. Fredrik Lindeberg, Netnod security expert, and Olle Johansson, who leads the Robust Internet project. So please do join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I'm Olle Johansson, and long-time internet geek, and this is By the Water.
Sorry, Fredrik Lindeberg, working at Netnod. Not as long-time internet geek as Olle, for obvious reasons, but still an internet geek, I'd say.
Where's my wheelchair? And Good morning. How many here are internet geeks in the room? How many here are, I would say, graybirds? We have MC and a few others. Patrick, I see over there at the end of the light. How many here classify yourself as internet old fart? Okay, we have a safe room. That's good. I feel very at home with you. And I can tell you that we're not going to talk a lot about technology. Because we're friends, we're geeks, we're internet nerds, we're graybeards, we're farts. I'm going to talk about feelings. Are you ready for that? Okay. So, where's the clicker? We have the clicker. Great. So, the internet. A long time ago, when many of you weren't alive, I sold products. And one of the first questions was, are you aware of the internet? And 99.9% of the customers said, no, what's that? Is that Novell Netware? And I had to tell a story about a network with amazing number of computers, 50,000 computers being interconnected, because I sold TCP/IP stacks for DOS. In many eyes here, I became much older, right? DOS. Do you even remember that operating system? From that point, the internet started to grow. And we're all here today talking about transmitting traffic between internet exchange points, fiber optics, and all that. It's been quite a ride. Hasn't it? Has it? Cool. It's morning. They haven't got coffees. That's a problem. But early on, I organized conferences because I had to teach people about the internet to sell stuff, right? And we had the Broadband Sweden conference. And there was this new player saying, oh, we're going to provide every apartment in the building with 10 megabits of internet. And after a while, we asked, what about the connection out from the building? Oh, it's 10 megabits. We're like, 20 apartments times 10 and 10. Oh, we sold that. We sold that. We're placing a web cache here in the basement. The idea was something like Al Gore spoke about, the super information highway, where we would sit down, enjoy the ride, and get the information flowing, being consumers of information. But that's not the picture we had. I'm actually as old, so I was in the Royal Technical High School of Stockholm, listening to Tim Berners-Lee when he spoke about a vision called the web. And the vision was equally producing information as consuming, sharing information. And of course, we got peer-to-peer networks. We got all kinds of things. And then COVID happened and all of us was at home using video conferences. We were producing media like crazy. So the web cache would no longer help. But these are two very different visions. Being part of the internet, producing information, or only being a consumer That's the cable TV business model, right? Not the internet as I see it. And while this was growing, the governments got a bit worried, which they should be. When new technology comes, when new things happen and things that aren't really under control. And we worked hard to get the right attitude for them, to get room for innovation, room for change. We had many discussions. Some of us went down to Geneva because there was this discussion about the US government owning the DNS and thus owning the internet. And we worked hard, and the government in the US said, well, governments are slow, and we have to be slow. But the internet moves fast, so you better prove to us that you can manage this so we don't have to take over. And that was the birth of ICANN, right? But we've done this a number of times, having discussions with government on where to go and asking them kindly to stay away. And the net grew. You all know it. Karin said it today. The net is growing constantly. And it's amazing how it affects all of us. Isn't it? People are sitting here with laptops, computers. I mean, how many devices do we have in the room? It's amazing. But what we felt a few years ago when we started looking into this growth is that, well, if you look at it, the network, the infrastructure is really focused on the major cities. It's focused on the super information highway design in very many cases. This applies to application layers as well as going down in the network layers. Important infrastructures centralized to 1 or 2 or 3 places in Sweden.
And this is, of course, an oversimplification, right? But the truth is that if you want to exchange traffic up there in the north of Sweden somehow, in all possibility, the traffic goes from you down to Stockholm, changes to another ISP, and then goes up again. There is virtually no local traffic exchange anymore in Sweden.
And this applies to applications as well. If you look at telephony, where I've been spending 20 years, IP telephony, do you think that emergency calls are routed within the region to the regional call center for emergency calls? No. So northern Sweden is dependent upon Stockholm working in order to get emergency calls working. And this applies to mobile, this applies to IP telephony and all others. So new services came. I already spoke about COVID change. But apart from that, I mean, I didn't even notice that the antenna on my villa back home got broken at one winter because we haven't used it for a long time, right? We used Apple TV and we use streaming services over the net. So we're consuming more and more, and the network grows more and more, which is probably why we're here. But alongside all of these cool consumer services, there are a lot of small services that doesn't show up in the bandwidth graphs, but are important. And this is where we have to start talking about feelings, the gut feeling, saying that, okay, we can't make payments anymore in cash in most of the stores. We rely on the net. When I communicate with my dad, being 91 years old, I use WordFeud chat, right? That's the only chat that he will respond in. And it's not hosted in Sweden. It's not regionally dispersed, right? When I'm the old guy, I can tell more stories than you. When I got into a hospital because of pain in the middle of the night, they took an X-ray And I said, well, we have to wait until the doctors come in the morning because they're not here at night, right? No, 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 they said, we have doctors in Australia, they work daytime. Over the net, health services over the net. When I communicate with my local healthcare, it's a video call over the net. So the net is everywhere. And for important services. And I've been using examples from the internet, but the same fiber infrastructure we're talking about is also used for a lot of other services. For corporate networks, for radio, TV, universities, military, other things. So we have one fiber infrastructure in the country, and all of our lives depend on this. Depends on Stockholm. Depends on a few critical points. That made us worried. That forced us to start working. That forced us to rethink. And for that, we needed young people like Fredrik.
Thank you, Olle. So we rethink. Sorry, wrong direction. So we met up a few years ago, actually, to create a new architecture design for the internet. I just realized while looking through the slides before the presentation, it's not a few years anymore. It's closer to 10. Time passes quickly. So within an earlier iteration of this group called 5 små hus, which literally means 5 small buildings, an architecture was proposed or designed. And this architecture is based on a resilient fiber infrastructure, where the country, and we're talking about Sweden in this case, is split up into multiple regions. Each region has multiple connections to other regions, and within each region there are 5 houses connected with a mesh network, so that local interconnect can take place, local package exchange can happen. This is, of course, an ideal solution. It will not necessarily happen on market terms, right? You all know that architectures and designs like these are quite expensive.
In addition to the fiber optics and interconnects, we also suggested a few critical services in these buildings, or at least in each region, like DNS resolvers and a few other things.
Yes, and we're also in the current project discussing services such as 112, SOS alarm, to be able to call emergency services and stuff like that. Can we make a technical design which allows for local municipalities to get information out to citizens in the local area? And of course, IPv6. As soon as you start building a large network of networks, it makes a lot of sense to have a large address space, and the design becomes much simpler if you have a large address space. So it will naturally be IPv6. And this is part of the 5 små hus design. And Olle and friends, is Tobbe in here, by the way? Yeah, we have Tobbe down there, IPv6, Tobbe. They've been on stage for years talking about IPv6, so we thought we would try something new and bring me on stage to say IPv6 instead. But still, it's IPv6. For these ideal networks, these ideal robust networks, you need IPv6 at a technical level.
Absolutely.
And
he's becoming a good old fart as well. Just wait.
So the idea behind this project, right? It's that a robust society should be able to take a punch. And I think it was Mike Tyson who said that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And the idea here is that if we need a robust internet, which I think we do, we need to build that robust internet before something bad happens. And something bad here, it could be a natural disaster, it could be an invasion, it could be a bridge accidentally falling down, which contains a lot of optical fibers, which are important for national infrastructure. So key takeaway here, if we are about to get punched in the face. We need to have solved the communications issue beforehand. That's why we need a robust infrastructure. And as you might have noticed or thought about, this is not primarily a technical problem, right? Like anyone, quote unquote, can design a robust network with pen and paper, right? The problem is...
It was actually part of the story, sorry for interrupting. When we sold the internet, we said that, oh, the protocol is designed so if one city in the US disappears from the map, the traffic will be rerouted other ways. That was part of the original story that, well, got lost.
Exactly. And so this is at its core, it's not a technical problem, right? Anybody could talk about this ideal network design. The problem is getting there, actually, or how getting closer to that ideal image or picture. And the current market design we have for electronic communications in Europe and in Sweden will not really take us there. We need to rethink how market incentives work in this sector, probably, to get there. The issue, very simply put, is how do we get more resources into electronic communications networks? How do we build more robust than what people today are willing to pay for? So, we're partially turning ourselves into lobbyists. The first iteration of the project was discussing technical design. We're still discussing technical design, but we're trying to involve more people now to get a conversation going. And we're not saying that we have the perfect solution for how the system should work, especially when it comes to financing and system responsibility, but we're saying that somebody needs to have system responsibility for a robust internet, particularly in Sweden, but for most other countries as well. There needs to be someone responsible for the system, right? And one of the key issues is that we think there's a gap between what an internet user think they buy versus what they actually get. So an internet user at home might not be that reliant on the internet, right? If internet goes down, sure, you can't watch your cat videos, right? You can't watch Netflix, nobody dies. But what if the internet access for a hospital goes down? Suddenly, as Olle said before, the situation becomes much more dire, much more critical. And we don't think that all hospitals, all regions, all municipalities today, we don't think that they have the competence to properly procure these redundant and diverse internet accesses needed to provide the security that society today puts on them.
And this is the gap that worries us, that people who use the internet, who pay for the internet, believe they're getting something much, much more stable than what it really is.
So one of the key things we think we understand, we might be wrong, of course. I'm not saying we're completely right. We might be wrong. But we think that this is a key factor, that the public sector needs to become better at procuring electronic communication services. The public sector needs to become better, both at opening up their wallets and also specifying what they actually want and need for their societies to function. For example, a municipality or a hospital or a region, for example. We think this is a key problem that regions or the public sector in general do not properly procure electronic communication services, in particular internet access.
And the government sector is often the leader and others can follow. Right now, even if I had a large company and I want to procure services, it would be really hard to get them because the response from the salespeople in most cases will be, no one asked for it. We're good. This is what we have. But by having the public sector taking a lead, the services will be created. It can be used by everyone.
Exactly. And just to put the public sector in perspective here. So the public sector is not a small sector, right? In most Western democracies, the public sector is like half of all spending. That's a good number. Half of all spending is the public sector. So if the public sector starts spending money in a different way, that will have repercussions and effects throughout the market.
And Tube and I and the old IPv6 crowd have seen this for years. We've been speaking about IPv6 for years. And the response people are getting when they ask their service provider is that no one asks for it. So you have to find mechanics to turn a change around, and using public spending is a good way of starting this
Yes.
change.
One of the key issues here is how many hours can we actually handle without internet access? And then we don't mean cat videos or Netflix or YouTube. We mean society. For how long will society function without internet access?
Internet and all the other services running on the same fiber infrastructure. If you look at a small town somewhere in Sweden, doesn't have to be northern Sweden, which is usually the example we use. When you pay, in many stores you have to pay with an online banking application called Swish, which relies on bank ID. Do you think that's regionally diverse? And the whole system is properly hosted by something. We had a big incident here in Sweden with Tietoevry hosting services, and stores all over Sweden had to shut down for a day or two. Some of them haven't really recovered yet. And that's how fragile the system is.
So we haven't figured everything out yet, of course, but we're trying to. We're doing our best. We're trying to start conversations, dialogues. We're trying to bring our technical expertise out there to talk to people in charge, in power, to make them change their opinion, or at least recognize that this is a potential problem for the future in Sweden. And we're on it. We're doing our best.
Yep, definitely. And it's a whole new world for many of us. How the government works, how we affect people, how we work with them, not only to require an immediate change today, stop the internet, rebuild it, start it all over again, but saying we need long-term goals and we need to move everyone in the right position to reach along those goals, to reach somewhere where the net is a safer place, the services running are more secure and more stable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think we're quite done, actually, Olle.
Okay. The project so far has been funded by the TU Foundation. The TU Foundation is the owner of Netnod. And the TU Foundation operates this with the help of me and a few others. And we invite you to become part of the dialogue and the work towards the future.
Yes, so the
here's
two of
us.
us.
Do we have any time for questions?
We've got one question already from
Okay.
Menti, so we'll start with that one.
Yep, Tilo.
Yeah, the internet has a question, and they're asking about with every design choice, the system boundary matters a lot, and they're wondering what makes the country of Sweden the right level to work on this robustness problem. Why not Europe, region of Stockholm, or why is it specifically Sweden that's the boundary?
Well, we're Swedish. We have to start somewhere, but we are learning how this works, because a lot of the regulation, a lot of the things that happen in Sweden are, of course, coming from the EU. And we're trying to follow up and see what happens and see if we can find friends in other countries. But right now, our primary focus is Sweden.
With that said, the question has been brought up, and we're discussing how to widen it, especially in terms of writing texts in English, because all the documentation today is in Swedish. So if you Google TU-stiftelsen 5 små hus, you will find the technical specification from the first project, but it's all in Swedish, for example. So we're thinking about how we can perhaps translate it or make it more broadly available.
Excellent.
Any more questions from the audience? One over there.
Hello, my name is Mark from Tele2. I was wondering, is this somehow connected to the PTS project for regional robustness?
A very good question indeed. if you read the presentations on the regional robustness project, they're based in parts of the Femsmohus documentation that we created many years ago. I didn't say a few years ago. So we have a dialogue, and of course Netnod, who's part of the TU Foundation group, is an active part of that project as well.
But yes, they're definitely connected. So the PTS project, Regional Robustness, is one step of the way towards the ideal network design proposed in Femsmohus. Definitely part of it. So they're connected.
Hugge, graybeard to be.
Yeah, I actually had my hand up on the graybeard question, even though it hasn't turned gray yet. Right, yeah, for the course play from Amazon Web Services. So you said that public sector, that they need to change whatever they're doing. Like, what are they really doing wrong, though? I really wanted to ask what was this presentation about, because I still don't get it, but that is not a very nice question to ask, but in a way, right? But what are they doing wrong, though? Like, what are they not doing today that you think that they should be doing?
Well, if I start with the old Olle, IPv6 is not a requirement.
The most boring thing.
But that's the simple answer, right? But I've been working with, for instance, a public tender for telephony service, both mobile and fixed line. And there were 3 different specifications of something that was internet access. And none of them were actually specified. You couldn't measure delivery. You couldn't, if I asked, there was no response on what it contained. So yes, public procurement can be much, much better. And we're working within the group of organizations that we have in Sweden with technical people, and you know them all. We're working on yet another internet service specification. We'll see where that goes. But we have gotten questions from the public sector about delivering a specification which they can point to when procuring services.
Okay, so I mean, outside of the IPv6 stuff, right, which is obvious and is like the oldest, conversation in the book that everyone has been having all the time.
Yeah.
But is there anything other than that, though, that you think that they should be asking for? Or do we need another internet specification to be able to answer that question first? Or what's your take on that?
I personally haven't got a detailed response on your level, Hugge. But you're welcome to join the meetings. But we're working on an internet access specification, which you can also find on GitHub, that contains both technical requirements and ways to measure how a service actually follows those technical requirements. Do you have any comments?
Yeah. How should I say this in 2 minutes rather than 2 hours? So one of the problems is the way public procurement works, right? So when you procure something as a public entity, you basically send out a specification, a tender, and anyone can basically bid on that tender. And basically what happens is that the public entity picks the cheapest alternative. Not necessarily the best alternative, but the cheapest alternative based on the factors they have. So if the initial tender is not that well specified, the option they choose will not be the best option. And they might not realize that they didn't pick the best option. I think there is a Bildungs problem as well, that there is a lack of networking knowledge in the public sector as well.
Yeah. If you need help in this project from some of the largest networks in the world, like give me a shout and I'll bring some of the friends of mine, and we'll come and we'll
Shout.
And we'll come and we help out, right? Because
Thank you.
I mean, we've been building internets in 245 countries. So.
You were actually part of the first meetings. Don't hide that.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah,
but then I
yeah.
wasn't invited anymore because I was negative to the whole thing. So
Oh, I talked with you at last Netnod meeting.
It's not about you, Ole. It's certainly not about you.
I tried to get you, but thank you. I listened.
I'll come.
Next question. We had someone over here. Yeah.
Yeah, hello, Tobias from Global Connect. Have you reached out to the government agencies of Sweden? Because I know there's a lot about talk about different private networks, like every other big government agency want to keep things off the internet, build their own stuff, parallel, and this public spending, 50%, yeah, I'm a taxpayer in Sweden, like, yeah, what's your take on...
To go back a bit, the idea with Fem små hus was to build a network that, according to the TU Foundation vision, would be one network for all services and users. The idea was that if we could build a fiber infrastructure architecture that could actually take all that traffic, the military traffic, government traffic, corporate traffic, alongside with internet services, then all services would benefit, and the investment would be lower for all instead of building a lot of separate vertical networks. There's a model from the Society for Engineering something, I don't remember the English translation, IVA, Ingenjörsvetenskapsakademin, that talks about getting lost in the lasagna, right? Instead of building in layers like we're proposing, they want to build a vertical something by themselves, controlled by themselves. And we don't think that's the right way. Having said that, that goes back both to Fem små hus and the TU Foundation goals. We are constantly looking at what happens right now in the government and see if there is any chance for us to interact early or interact through the public request for comments. But you know more about that.
Yeah, but it's politics, right? So I don't know how much I should say on stage. But yes, it's actually one of the bigger topics we discuss when we talk with public entities, right? How can the internet better be used as a availability communications platform for society in general? So instead of specialized, vertically separated communications infrastructure, how can other services use the internet for transport or communications as for availability?
But we have celebrated a few winnings. There were reports where we found out that they actually mentioned the internet infrastructure as important for society. That was in the civilian military.
Yes, so we could mention that actually. So now I will simplify a bit to make a point very quickly. So if you go back a bit in time, just a couple of years, the internet was just for fun and entertainment, right? Then Ukraine happened. Then the perspective shifted, and suddenly people and government agencies realized that the internet can be important for other things than cat videos as well, right? So this fall, there were actually two reports, one from MSB, the Civil Continuity Agency in Sweden, and one from the Försvarsrådberedningen, which would be like the Defense Council of the Parliament, which explicitly state that the internet is important for other things than cat videos. So there is a large political shift happening right now, actually. So if we would have been here on stage a year and a half ago, the public sector would not recognize the internet as an important communications platform in the same way they officially recognize it as today.
And I think all of us in this room should take credit for that change. It is an important change. Yep.
Thank you.
1 second, Paf. You have a question, comment? Can someone give a microphone to Patrick, please?
I don't suspect it's going to be a question, but additional.
Okay, I think Patrik Feldström, head of security at Netnod. Okay, so there is a big elephant in the room, and Hugo asked, so what is public sector doing that is not correct? Okay, I think the public sector is doing quite a lot of things. For example, as owner of fiber networks around Sweden, a lot of public services that do not use the internet, and instead they are looking at other kind of solutions, like the current discussion about the Rakel Generation 2, which at the moment is something that we talk about, the question on what kind of architecture are we going to use to spend $10 billion for yet another mobile network in Sweden that primarily is to be used for mobile data, and that is for IP packets. And you have the SGSI network that Brussels have decided is more secure than anything else. Okay, That's just a start of the list. So it's not the case that it's only IPv6. The question is, how do we fit the internet architecture in what public sector is doing? Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, I think for purposes of time and good moderation, we'll leave it there. So please join me in thanking Olle and Fredrik for a very lively presentation.
Thank